We don't serve extra food. Those were the exact words my daughter-in-law, Rochelle, said as she signaled the waiter to take away my menu. Just water. While her entire family, her parents, herself, and my own son devoured a royal seafood tower right in front of my eyes. Enormous lobster tails glistening with melted butter, fresh oysters on crushed ice, and bottles of vintage wine that cost more than my car payment. She didn't even have the decency to be subtle about it. She announced it to the table with that fake, tight-lipped smile she always uses when she wants to humiliate me while pretending she's just staying on budget. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was seeing my son, Ricky, nod his head. My son, whom I raised alone, whom I sacrificed everything for, looked at me with cold eyes and added, "You should know your place, Mom." I stayed silent, not because I didn't have words. I had them, plenty of them. I could have told them right then and there, but something inside me decided to hold them back, to observe, to wait. Rochelle blinked, confused for a second. I think she expected tears, apologies, maybe a scene where I begged for a scrap of bread. But I gave her none of that. Just that one word, noted, "Let me explain how I got here. How I ended up sitting in the Gilded Stag, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Vermont, watching my own family feast while I sat with a glass of tap water. Because this story didn't start tonight. It started years ago when I decided that being a mother meant sacrificing everything, and my son decided that wasn't enough. The silence in my house is something I've grown used to, even if I never quite learned to like it. It's a specific kind of quiet that settles into the corners of a room when you live alone in a modest suburban home in Burlington, Vermont. I'm 68 years old, and I've spent the last few years curating a life that is small, manageable, and dignified. I don't live simply because I have to. I live simply because I choose to. There is a difference, though most people don't have the patience to see it. My furniture is older, yes, but it is solid oak, polished every Sunday. My curtains are not the latest trend, but they are heavy, quality linen that keeps the winter draft out. I value stability. I value things that last. But stability can be lonely. It was a Tuesday evening when the pattern of my life was interrupted. The sun was just starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across my living room floor. I was settling in with a book, the television off, when the phone rang. The sound was so jarring in the quiet house that I actually jumped. I stared at the device on the side table for a moment, wondering who would be calling at this hour. Usually it's a telemarketer or perhaps a wrong number. But when I picked it up and looked at the caller ID, my breath hitched in my throat. Ricky, my son. My thumb hovered over the answer button. My heart, traitorous thing that it is, started to race. It had been 2 years. 2 years of silence. 2 years of unreturned birthday cards and calls that went straight to voicemail. Ricky, who had once been my pride and joy, the boy I had worked 3 jobs to support, had become a stranger to me. I took a deep breath, steadied my hand, and answered, "Hello. Hi, Mom." His voice stopped me cold. It wasn't the rushed, annoyed tone I had come to expect in the final days before the estrangement. It was sweet, unusually sweet. It sounded like the Ricky of 20 years ago, before life and marriage and resentment had hardened him. "Ricky," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "is everything all right?" "Everything's great, Mom." "Really great," he said, and I could hear a smile in his voice. "Look, I know it's been a while. Too long. But Rochelle and we were talking. We want to see you." Rochelle, his wife. The mention of her name made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Rochelle had always been cool toward me. From the moment she entered Ricky's life, I was pushed to the margins. She treated me like a relic, something outdated and embarrassing that needed to be hidden away. She didn't like my house. She didn't like my clothes. She certainly didn't like my influence on her husband. Rochelle wants to see me? I asked, unable to keep the skepticism out of my voice. We both do, Ricky insisted, breezing past my doubt. We want to take you out for dinner. A celebration. A celebration? I asked. For what? For family, he said. For reconnecting. We're going to that nice place in Stowe. You know the one? We're heading up there this weekend, and we want you to meet us. My treat. Please, Mom. Just say yes. Stowe is a wealthy area, known for its upscale ambience. It was a far cry from the diners Ricky and I used to go to when he was a boy. I sat there, gripping the phone, my mind racing. Every alarm bell in my head was ringing. People don't change overnight. Rochelle didn't suddenly develop a conscience or a fondness for her mother-in-law. There was a reason for this. There was an angle. I knew it in my gut. I knew I should say no. I knew I should protect my peace and stay in my safe, quiet home. But then the other part of me took over. The part that remembered teaching Ricky to tie his shoes. The part that remembered his smile at graduation. The grandmother's heart that foolishly, desperately hopes that maybe, just maybe, her child has come back to her. Hope is a dangerous thing for a mother. It makes you blind to what is right in front of you. Okay, I heard myself say, okay, Ricky, I'll come. That's great, Mom. You won't regret it. We'll see you at 7 p.m. on Saturday. I'll text you the address. He hung up quickly, as if afraid I would change my mind. I sat in the silence for a long time after the line went dead. The house felt different now. The safety of it felt fragile. I had invited chaos back in. Saturday arrived with a gray, overcast sky. I spent the afternoon getting ready, moving with a deliberate slowness to calm my nerves. I went to my closet and pushed past the everyday cardigans and slacks until I found it. My navy blue dress. I pulled it out and laid it on the bed. It was a modest choice, but elegant. It was a few seasons old, certainly not the high fashion Rochelle preferred, but the fabric was good, and the cut was timeless. I had bought it years ago, thinking I would wear it to special occasions, anniversaries, parties, maybe a grandchild's christening. Instead, it had mostly gathered dust. I put it on, smoothing the fabric down over my hips. I put on my pearl earrings, not real, but they looked it, and applied a touch of lipstick. I brushed my hair, pinning it back neatly. I stood in front of the hallway mirror and looked at the woman staring back. I saw the lines on my face, the map of 68 years of life. I saw a woman who had worked hard, who had sacrificed, and who had been left behind. But I also saw someone who was done being a victim. I felt a sudden surge of steel in my spine. I wasn't just going to dinner. I was going to find out the truth. I was walking into the lion's den, yes, but I wasn't going in blind. I knew who Rochelle was. I knew who Ricky had become. I leaned in closer to the mirror, looking myself dead in the eye. I will go, I whispered to the empty house. I will give them one chance. But if they are cruel, if they treat me like a burden one more time, I will leave. I grabbed my purse, took a deep breath, and walked out the door. I didn't know it yet, but I was driving toward a night that would change everything. I thought I was walking into a trap, but I had no idea just how cold that trap would be, or that I held the key to the entire cage in my pocket. The drive to Stowe usually takes about 45 minutes from my house, but that evening it felt like an eternity. I kept my hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel of my 10-year-old sedan, focusing on the winding roads. As I climbed higher into the mountains, the scenery changed. The modest family homes and roadside diners disappeared, replaced by gated driveways, manicured hedges, and chalets that cost more than I had earned in the first 30 years of my life. I pulled up to the address Ricky had sent me, the Gilded Stag. It was an imposing building designed to look like a rustic lodge, but built with the kind of money that screams exclusivity. Massive timber beams framed the entrance, and the soft glow of gas lanterns illuminated a fleet of luxury cars in the driveway. A valet was sprinting between Bentleys and Range Rovers. I felt a familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach, the kind that comes from knowing you are about to step onto a stage where everyone else knows the lines but you. I pulled my car up to the valet stand. The young man on duty looked at my sedan. Clean, but undeniably older, with a moment of hesitation before pasting a professional smile on his face. "Evening, ma'am," he said, opening my door. "Good evening," I replied, handing him the keys. I didn't apologize for my car. I stopped doing that years ago. I smoothed the front of my navy dress and walked toward the heavy oak doors. My heart was thumping a little harder now, not from fear of the venue, but from the dread of who was waiting inside. I checked my watch. 6:58 p.m. I was exactly on time. Punctuality is the courtesy of kings, my father used to say. It was a lesson Ricky seemed to have forgotten over the years. I pushed open the doors and stepped into the lobby. The air inside was cool and smelled of expensive perfume, wood smoke, and roasted garlic. It was hushed, the sound of clinking silverware and low conversation absorbed by thick velvet curtains and plush carpets. At the host's stand stood James. James is the maitre d' of the Gilded Stag. He is a man of impeccable standards, with a spine as stiff as a rod and a memory that never fails. He was looking down at the reservation book, frowning slightly as he adjusted his glasses. When he heard my footsteps, he looked up, his professional mask firmly in place. Then he saw me. The mask slipped. His eyes went wide, and his mouth opened slightly. He took a quick step around the podium, his hands raising as if to embrace an old friend. "Mrs. Pittman," he began, his voice pitching up with genuine warmth. "I didn't know you were—" I froze him with a look. It wasn't a mean look, but it was firm. I locked eyes with him, gave a barely perceptible shake of my head, and then very slowly raised my index finger to my lips. "Sure." James stopped mid-stride. He is a professional. He recovered in a microsecond. He blinked once, processing the signal. He looked past me, scanning the dining room to see who I was here to meet, and then looked back at me. The warmth didn't leave his eyes, but the familiarity vanished from his posture. He straightened his jacket and cleared his throat. "Good evening, madam," he said, his voice dropping to a smooth, neutral baritone. "Welcome to the Gilded Stag. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm joining the Pittman party," I said softly, lowering my hand. "My son made the reservation." Yes," James said, glancing at the book he didn't need to read. "Mr. Ricky Pittman. Table 4 by the window." He stepped aside to guide me, but as I passed him, he leaned in just an inch, his voice a whisper only I could hear. "It is good to see you, Marguerite. We've missed you." "Thank you, James," I whispered back, not breaking my stride. "Just a guest tonight. Treat me like a stranger." "Understood," he murmured. He led me through the dining room. I kept my head high, ignoring the glances from other diners who assessed my outfit and dismissed me in the span of a second. We weaved through the tables until we reached the prime spot near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the mountains. And there they were. Ricky was sitting with his back to me, his shoulders hunched slightly as if he were bracing for impact. Rochelle sat across from him, looking radiant and sharp in a dress that probably cost more than my car. Next to her were her parents, the Ashcrofts. I had only met them twice before, at the wedding and at a chaotic Christmas dinner 3 years ago. Mr. Ashcroft was a large man who took up too much space, his face flushed from what looked like his second scotch. Mrs. Ashcroft was thin, draped in jewelry that clinked every time she moved her wrist. They were laughing at something Rochelle had said, but the laughter died the moment I approached the table. Rochelle saw me first. Her smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. She tapped Ricky's hand, and he jumped, turning around in his chair. "Mom," Ricky said. He sounded relieved, but also nervous. He stood up halfway, caught in an awkward crouch, unsure whether to hug me or shake my hand. "Hello, Ricky," I said, smiling politely. "You're here," Rochelle said. It wasn't a greeting, it was an observation, delivered with a flat tone. She glanced at her diamond-encrusted watch. "We thought you might have gotten lost. The roads can be tricky if you're not used to driving up here." "I know the roads just fine, Rochelle," I said pleasantly, "and I'm 2 minutes early." I turned to her parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashcroft, it's good to see you again." Mrs. Ashcroft looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my shoes for a fraction of a second too long. "Marguerite," she said, offering a limp hand without standing up. "It's been ages. You're looking, well, very rustic." "Thank you," I said, ignoring the barb. James, who had been standing silently behind me, stepped forward. With a flourish that was usually reserved for royalty or celebrities, he pulled out the empty chair for me. He didn't just slide it. He held it, waited for me to sit, and then tucked it in with a gentle precision that made Rochelle frown. She looked from James to me, confused by the level of service for a woman she considered a nuisance. "Your server will be with you momentarily," James said, bowing his head slightly to me, and only me, before turning to the rest of the table. "Enjoy your evening." As he walked away, I settled into my seat. The table was already crowded with glassware. A bottle of heavy red wine was open and half empty. Rochelle and her parents had large goblets in front of them. Ricky was nursing a whiskey. There was no glass for me. So Mr. Ashcroft boomed, leaning back in his chair. "Ricky tells us you're still in that little house in Burlington. The market is booming, Marguerite. You haven't thought about selling? Downsizing to a condo? You could probably use the equity." "I like my home," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "It has memories." "Memories don't pay the heating bills," Mrs. Ashcroft chirped, taking a sip of her wine. "We just bought a winter getaway in Aspen. The maintenance is a nightmare, but you have to park the money somewhere, don't you?" "I suppose so," I said. Ricky looked down at his drink, swirling the ice cubes. He was refusing to meet my eyes. My heart sank a little. I had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that he would defend me, that he would say, "Mom worked hard for that house," or "Mom is happy where she is." But he said nothing. He just let them pick at me, like birds pecking at a crumb. "Well," Rochelle said, clapping her hands together with forced brightness, "let's not talk about real estate. This is a celebration. We're just happy you could make the trip, Marguerite. I know gas prices are up, so we appreciate the effort." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I forced it down. I looked around the restaurant, catching James's eye across the room. He was watching our table from the shadows near the kitchen, his face unreadable to anyone else. But I knew him. I saw the tightness in his jaw. He didn't like this. I turned back to my son and his new family. They thought I was trapped here with them, out of my depth, a poor old woman lucky to be invited to the feast. They didn't know that the man pouring their water, the chef in the kitchen, and the owner of the building were all on my team. I took a deep breath. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, and I meant it. I wasn't going to miss a single second of what was about to happen. The atmosphere at the table was thick enough to cut with a knife, though I seemed to be the only one feeling the weight of it. Once the initial awkward greetings were over, the Ashcrofts turned their bodies slightly inward, effectively closing the circle and leaving me on the outside. It's a subtle move, body language. You learn to read it when you get to my age. A turned shoulder, a lack of eye contact. It all screams, "You don't belong here." The villa in Tuscany was simply dreadful this time of year. Mrs. Ashcroft was saying, swirling her wine as if she were aerating a rare vintage rather than just drinking too fast. Too many tourists. We told the concierge. We came here for peace, not to be surrounded by backpackers. Europe isn't what it used to be, Mr. Ashcroft agreed, nodding solemnly. That's why we're looking at property in the south of France next. A little more exclusive. I sat quietly, my hands folded on the white tablecloth. I had never been to Europe. My travel budget had always gone into Ricky's college fund or braces or that summer camp he begged to go to when he was 12. Hearing them complain about a vacation most people dream of for a lifetime made my stomach twist. Ricky was nodding along with them, laughing at the right moments, trying so hard to fit into their world. It broke my heart a little to see him like this, a chameleon changing his colors to please people who clearly didn't respect him. He glanced at me once, a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but he quickly looked away when Rochelle placed a hand on his arm. Ricky agrees, don't you, honey? She cooed. We were just saying we need to upgrade our travel plans next year. Yeah, Ricky said, his voice tight. Absolutely. I took a sip of the tap water that had been poured for the table. I was hungry. I hadn't eaten since a light toast for breakfast, saving my appetite for this dinner. I was looking forward to a good meal, perhaps a nice piece of fish or a warm soup. The smell of roasted garlic and searing meat wafting from the kitchen was making my mouth water. Then, David appeared at the table. David is one of the best servers at the Gilded Stag. He's a young man, putting himself through engineering school. I've known him for 3 years. I know his mother is a nurse and that he's saving up for an engagement ring for his girlfriend. To Rochelle and her parents, he was just a uniform, a faceless servant there to fetch and carry. Good evening, David said, his voice smooth and professional. He handed out the heavy, leather-bound menus. When he handed me mine, his fingers lingered on the cover for just a second, a silent greeting. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Rochelle didn't even open her menu. She clearly wanted to show off. She wanted to prove she owned the room. We're going to start with the seafood tower, she announced loudly. The royal platter. Lobster, crab, oysters. The works. Excellent choice, David said, writing it down. And for the main courses, she continued, looking around the table. Daddy, you want the ribeye, don't you? The wagyu. You know me too well, Mr. Ashcroft chuckled. Make it rare. And Mother will have the Chilean sea bass, Rochelle directed. And Ricky and I will both have the lobster thermidor. Oh, and another bottle of wine. The Cabernet. The reserve list, please. I did the math in my head quickly. The seafood tower alone was over $100. The wagyu beef was market price, usually exorbitant. The wine she just ordered was $200 a bottle. They were racking up a bill that could pay my property taxes for a quarter. David finished writing down their orders. He turned his body toward me. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with respect. He knew I enjoyed the scallops here. He probably assumed I would order them. And for you, madam? David asked, his pen poised. May I recommend the... Oh, she's fine. Rochelle's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. David stopped. I stopped. The entire table seemed to freeze for a split second. Rochelle waved her hand dismissively in my direction, not even looking at me. She was looking at her nails. Marguerite isn't hungry. She ate a late lunch before she came. Didn't you, Marguerite? It wasn't a question. It was a command. I stared at her. I hadn't eaten a late lunch. My stomach was practically growling. I looked at Ricky. He was staring intensely at the tablecloth, his face flushing red. He knew I was hungry. He knew I never ate heavily before a dinner out. But he said nothing. He sat there, mute, letting his wife rewrite reality. Besides, Rochelle continued, leaning in toward the waiter as if sharing a secret, though she spoke loud enough for the next table to hear. We're trying to keep the bill reasonable. This place is a bit out of budget for some of us, so we're keeping it tight tonight. The silence that followed was deafening. Out of budget. I looked at the empty bottle of expensive wine. I looked at the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. I thought about the Royal Seafood Tower she had just ordered without blinking. And now, suddenly, a single entree for her mother-in-law was where the budget had to be cut. It was so absurd, so blatantly cruel, that I almost laughed. It wasn't about money. It was about power. She wanted to see if I would beg. She wanted to see if I would cause a scene and embarrass Ricky, proving to her parents that I was the trashy, low-class woman she always painted me to be. I felt a flash of white-hot anger in my chest. I wanted to tell her that I could buy this restaurant and fire everyone in it before she finished her appetizer. I wanted to tell her that my budget could swallow her whole, but I looked at David. His jaw was clenched tight. He looked ready to argue, ready to say, "But the lady hasn't ordered." I couldn't let him do that. Not yet. I took a slow breath. I picked up my cloth napkin and placed it calmly across my lap. I didn't look at Ricky. I didn't look at the Ashcrofts, who were suddenly very interested in the view outside. I looked directly at Rochelle, holding her gaze until she blinked and looked away. Then, I turned my eyes to the young waiter. I smiled. It was a genuine smile, warm and kind. "Water is fine," I said softly. "Thank you, David." Rochelle's head snapped up. She looked confused. She hadn't expected me to know his name. She hadn't expected me to be gracious. David hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes searching mine. He saw the resolve in my face. He saw the signal. Play along. "Very good, madam," David said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "I will bring fresh water immediately, and perhaps some bread for the table." "No bread," Rochelle snapped quickly. "We're saving room for the lobster." David gave a stiff bow and turned on his heel, walking away faster than usual. I sat back in my chair. My hunger was still there, a gnawing ache in my belly, but it had been replaced by a different kind of fuel. I watched Rochelle pick up her wine glass, looking smug, thinking she had won. She thought she had put me in my place. She thought she had shamed me into silence. She had no idea. By denying me food, she had just given me permission to take the gloves off. I watched the bubbles rise in my water glass and waited. The night was young, and while they were eating lobster, I would be feasting on something much more satisfying. 20 minutes later, the Royal Seafood Tower arrived. It was a spectacle, I'll give them that. A 3-tiered silver stand piled high with crushed ice, glistening oysters, chilled lobster tails, and crab legs the size of a man's forearm. It took 2 servers to place it in the center of the table, rearranging the wine glasses and silverware to make room for the excess. For a moment, conversation stopped as Rochelle and her parents admired the feast. "Now, this is living," Mr. Ashcroft declared, tucking his napkin into his collar like a bib. "You can't get freshness like this down in the city. You have to pay for quality." "Dig in, everyone," Rochelle chirped, reaching for a lobster claw. "Don't be shy." I sat perfectly still, my hands in my lap, my water glass the only thing in front of me. The sound of eating began. It is a specific, wet sound, the cracking of shells, the slurping of oysters, the clinking of forks against china. It filled the silence between us. They ate with a kind of aggressive enthusiasm, as if consuming the most expensive thing on the menu was a job they had to finish. I watched Ricky. He was peeling a shrimp, his head bowed low. He looked miserable. Every few seconds, his eyes would dart toward my empty place setting, and then quickly back to his plate. He knew. I could see the guilt eating him alive, sweating out of his pores. He knew his mother was sitting 3 feet away, hungry, while he gorged himself on shellfish. But he didn't speak. He didn't say, "Mom, have some of this crab." He didn't say, "Here, take my plate." He just dipped his shrimp in cocktail sauce and put it in his mouth. That silence hurt more than Rochelle's insults. Rochelle was an enemy. I expected cruelty from her. But Ricky was my blood. Seeing him cowed into submission, terrified to share a piece of bread with his own mother because his wife might roll her eyes, that was a pain that settled deep in my chest. "Delicious," Mrs. Ashcroft mumbled with her mouth full. "Simply melted butter and heaven. You're not missing much, Marguerite. Shellfish can be so messy, can it? Probably too much trouble for you." "I'm fine," I said, taking a small, dignified sip of my water. "Please enjoy." I turned my head to look out the window. The sun had set completely now, and the lights of the ski village were twinkling below us like diamonds in the snow. I tried to focus on that beauty, to detach myself from the humiliation happening at the table. Then I saw a reflection in the glass. David was coming back. He wasn't carrying a water pitcher this time. He was holding a small, white porcelain plate covered by a silver cloche, a dome used to keep food warm and mysterious. He walked with purpose, ignoring the other tables, heading straight for us. Rochelle noticed him coming and sat up straighter, wiping butter from her lip. She assumed, naturally, that whatever was under that silver dome was for her. "Did we order something else, Ricky?" she asked, eyeing the plate greedily. "Maybe the foie gras?" I thought about it. David stopped at the table. He didn't look at Rochelle. He didn't look at Ricky. He stepped into the small space between my chair and the window. With a gloved hand, he placed the plate gently in front of me. The table went silent. Even Mr. Ashcroft stopped chewing. With a flourish, David lifted the silver dome. Underneath was a masterpiece. It was a single, hand-harvested diver scallop, seared to a perfect golden brown. It sat atop a bed of creamy parsnip puree, garnished with shaved black truffle, and a delicate foam that smelled of earth and luxury. It was small, elegant, and undoubtedly expensive. Rochelle's fork clattered onto her plate. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp. "We didn't order that." She reached her hand out as if to pull the plate toward her side of the table. "There must be a mistake. We're doing the seafood tower. Who is this for?" David didn't flinch. He didn't move the plate an inch. He stood tall, his hands clasped behind his back, and looked down at Rochelle with a polite, professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "There is no mistake, madam," David said smoothly. "This is not for the table." "Then who is it for?" she demanded. "It is for the lady in the blue dress," David said. "Compliments of the chef." Rochelle blinked. She looked at me, then back at the waiter, then down at her own messy pile of lobster shells. "The chef," she repeated, her voice rising an octave. "Why would the chef send her food? Does he know her?" "Chef Julian sends his regards," David said, ignoring her question. He turned to me, his expression softening into genuine warmth. "He prepared this himself, specifically for you. He hopes it meets your standards." "Thank you, David," I said, my voice steady. "Please tell Julian it looks exquisite." "I will," David said. He gave a small bow and vanished back into the shadows of the dining room. For a long moment, no one moved. The scallop sat there, steaming gently, the aroma of truffle drifting across the table and overpowering the smell of their fish. Rochelle's face went through a series of contortions, shock, confusion, and finally, a sneering sort of jealousy. She leaned in close to Ricky, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper that was meant to be private, but was loud enough for me to hear perfectly. "Unbelievable," she hissed. "Why is the staff being so nice to her? It's embarrassing." I don't know, Ricky mumbled, looking at my scallop with wide eyes. She probably looks like a charity case, Rochelle whispered, casting a sideways glance at my dress. Look at her, Ricky. She's sitting there with just water. The staff probably feels sorry for the poor old woman who can't afford a meal. It's pity food. That's what it is. Pity food, Mrs. Ashcroft agreed, nodding sagely. How humiliating. I would send it back if I were you, Marguerite. I have too much pride to accept handouts. I looked at them. I looked at their greasy chins and their arrogance. They couldn't conceive of a world where I was respected. To them, the only reason anyone would be kind to me was pity. They were so blinded by their own self-importance that they couldn't see the truth staring them in the face. I didn't answer them. I didn't defend myself. I didn't tell them that Julian had cooked this scallop because he remembered it was my favorite from the winter menu 3 years ago. Instead, I picked up my fork. I cut a small piece of the scallop. It was perfectly cooked, tender as butter. I swept it through the truffle foam and placed it in my mouth. The flavor was explosive, rich, savory, and warm. I closed my eyes for a brief second, letting out a small, contented sigh. When I opened them, Rochelle was watching me, her lobster forgotten in her hand. She looked annoyed that I was enjoying it. She wanted me to be ashamed. She wanted me to feel small. But as I took another bite, savoring the food while they watched, I didn't feel small. I felt powerful. I was eating the best dish in the house, prepared with love, while they ate their expensive seafood with bitterness in their hearts. Is it good, Mom? Ricky asked, his voice cracking slightly. I looked at him, wiping the corner of my mouth with my napkin. It's perfect, Ricky, I said softly. Absolutely perfect. I saw Rochelle narrow her eyes. She sensed that something was off. She sensed that the dynamic of the table had shifted just a fraction. But she was too arrogant to understand why. She just stabbed her fork into another oyster, determined to prove that her meal was better, that her money made her superior. I took another bite, and for the first time that night, I genuinely smiled. The appetizers were done, but the main course, the real lesson, was yet to come. And I had a feeling it was going to be hard for them to swallow. The main course arrived like a parade. David and 2 other servers cleared the debris of the appetizer tower and replaced it with oval plates that were sizzling hot. The smell of rich, heavy cream, cognac, and melted cheese filled the air. Lobster thermidor. It is a dish that screams excess. Lobster meat cooked in a rich wine sauce, stuffed back into the shell, and browned under a broiler. Rochelle let out a little squeal of delight as her plate was set down. Oh, look at the size of it, she said, clapping her hands. Ricky, look at yours. It's huge. Yeah, Ricky said. He picked up his fork, his eyes sliding over to me for a brief second before he focused on his food. Looks great. They also brought the Wagyu beef for Mr. Ashcroft, a thick slab of meat with a sear so dark it was almost black, and the sea bass for Mrs. Ashcroft, swimming in a pool of lemon butter. My place setting remained empty. David had refilled my water glass, topping it off with a slice of lemon this time. I appreciated the gesture, but as I watched them pick up their heavy silverware, the disparity in the room felt physical. It was a wall between us. On one side, gluttony and laughter. On the other, silence and a glass of tap water. Aren't you going to order anything else, Marguerite? Mrs. Ashcroft asked, pausing with a forkful of fish halfway to her mouth. That little scallop can't possibly be enough. I'm quite all right, I said. I'm enjoying the company. It was a lie, of course. I wasn't enjoying the company. I was enduring it, but I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me hungry. They began to eat. The conversation turned, as it often does with people who have more money than manners, to the subject of wealth. Specifically, their wealth. The market has been volatile, Mr. Ashcroft announced, chewing heavily on his steak. But if you know where to move your assets, you can ride the wave. I moved everything into tech and energy last quarter. Made a killing. Daddy is a genius with money, Rochelle said, beaming at him. He's been teaching Ricky a few things. Haven't you, Daddy? Trying to, Mr. Ashcroft grunted. Ricky's a bit conservative with his portfolio. Scared to take risks. You have to spend money to make money, son. Ricky nodded, looking like a schoolboy being scolded by the principal. I know, Robert. I'm learning. Then Mr. Ashcroft turned his gaze on me. It wasn't a friendly look. It was the look of a man who thinks he has figured out the world and is looking at someone who failed the test. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and leaned back, gesturing at my empty spot on the table. You know, Marguerite, he started, his voice booming slightly. Seeing you sit there, skipping a meal to save a few dollars, it makes me think about the importance of planning. I stiffened. Excuse me? Financial planning, he clarified, pointing his steak knife at me for emphasis. It's a shame, really. Your generation. You worked hard, I'm sure, but you didn't work smart. You relied on pensions that dried up and savings accounts with no interest. Daddy, Rochelle giggled. Don't bore her. No, it's an important lesson, he insisted. It must be hard, living on a fixed income in this economy. Inflation eating away at your little nest egg. Having to rely on your children for a night out. It's a lack of options, really, and that lack of options comes from poor planning in your youth. The table went quiet. Rochelle was smirking. Mrs. Ashcroft looked bored. Ricky was staring at his lobster, his face pale. I felt a fire ignite in my chest. It wasn't anger, it was something colder. Poor planning? I thought about the years after Ricky's father left. I thought about the double shifts at the diner. I thought about the nights I sat up sewing Ricky's clothes because I couldn't afford new ones. I thought about the college fund I built, dollar by dollar, sacrificing my own vacations, my own car, my own comfort, so that Ricky could walk onto a campus without debt. I didn't have a nest egg because I gave the egg to my son, and he had cracked it open and made an omelet for himself and his wife. I looked Mr. Ashcroft in the eye. It wasn't poor planning, Robert, I said, keeping my voice calm and even. It was a difference in investment strategy. He raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Yes, I said. You invest in stocks and energy. You invest in things that are cold and impersonal. I invested in people. Rochelle snorted. People? What does that even mean? I turned to look at my son. It means I put my resources into the people I loved. I invested in their education. I invested in their safety. And later in life, I invested in people with vision who needed a chance. I was talking about Julian, the chef. I was talking about how I gave him the money to open his first restaurant when no bank would touch him. I was talking about the loyalty I had built, a currency far more valuable than the credit card Rochelle was about to use. Sometimes, I continued, those investments take longer to mature. They don't show up on a quarterly statement, but when they do pay off, the returns are significant. I let the words hang in the air. Significant. For a second, I thought Ricky might understand. I thought he might hear the code in my voice. I thought he might remember the sacrifices, but he didn't. He just looked annoyed. He looked embarrassed that his mother was talking back to his rich father-in-law. He put his fork down with a clatter. Mom, please, Ricky sighed, rolling his eyes. Don't start with your riddles. We are trying to have a nice night. I'm just explaining. I started. No, you're doing that thing you always do. He cut me off. You're trying to make yourself sound noble because you don't have any money. Robert is just trying to give you some advice. You should listen to him instead of getting defensive. He picked up his wine glass and took a large gulp, gaining courage from the alcohol. Honestly, Mom, he said, his voice dripping with irritation. You're a guest here. You're lucky to be at a table like this. You should know your place. You should know your place. The words hit me like a physical slap. The noise of the restaurant seemed to drop away. I looked at my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the boy I had protected from the world, and I saw a stranger, a weak, ungrateful stranger. He wasn't just distant. He was cruel. He had just told his mother to know her place in front of people who treated her like dirt. I looked at Rochelle. She was beaming. She looked at Ricky with genuine affection for the first time all night. She loved this. She loved seeing him put me down. It was the price of admission to her world, and he had just paid it in full. Noted, I said. My voice was barely a whisper, but it was steady. Noted, I said again, louder this time. Good, Ricky said, turning back to his lobster. Now let's just eat and have a good time. I nodded slowly. Yes, let's finish. I picked up my glass of water. My hand didn't shake. Inside, the last thread of hope had just snapped. The grandmother who wanted to reconcile, the mother who wanted to believe the best, she was gone. She had left the building. The woman sitting in the chair now was the investor, and I was about to close the account. I watched them eat. I watched them laugh. I waited for the plates to be cleared. I waited for the bill, because I knew my place exactly, and in about 20 minutes, they were going to know it too. The dinner finally wound down. It ended not with a bang, but with the heavy, sluggish silence of people who have eaten too much and cared too little. The table was a graveyard of excess. Empty lobster shells were piled high on the silver platters like discarded bones. The wine bottles, 3 of them now, stood empty, their dark glass reflecting the candlelight. Rochelle's parents were finishing the last of a tiramisu that they had insisted on ordering, despite claiming they were stuffed 10 minutes prior. They scrapped their spoons against the crystal bowls, getting every last drop of mascarpone. I sat with my hands folded in my lap. My water glass was empty, and David hadn't refilled it for the last 20 minutes. I knew why. He was staying away. He was watching from the service station, his arms crossed, waiting for the signal. He knew the end of the play was approaching, and he didn't want to interfere with the final act. Well, Mr. Ashcroft groaned, patting his stomach. That was spectacular. A meal fit for a king. You did good, Ricky. You did good. Ricky forced a smile. He looked pale. The alcohol had flushed his cheeks earlier, but now that the adrenaline of the meal was fading, reality was setting in. He was tapping his foot nervously against the table leg. Thanks, Robert, Ricky said. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Enjoyed it? I loved it, Mrs. Ashcroft chirped, wiping chocolate from her lip. And the brandy was a nice touch. You really know how to treat family, Ricky. Treat family. I looked at the empty space in front of me where a plate should have been. I looked at the single scallop I had eaten an hour ago. I wondered if Mrs. Ashcroft understood the irony of her words, or if she was truly that blind. Then David appeared. He held a black leather folder in his hand. It was sleek, heavy, and ominous. He didn't say a word. He simply placed it gently in the center of the table, right between Ricky and Rochelle. Thank you, David, I said softly. He gave me a quick, sharp nod and backed away. The folder sat there for a moment. It had a gravity to it. In a restaurant like the Gilded Stag, the bill isn't just a piece of paper. It's a mortgage payment. Rochelle reached for it. Her movements were confident, almost arrogant. She was the hostess, the queen of the evening. She flipped open the leather cover with a flick of her wrist, expecting, I suppose, to see a number she could brush off with a laugh. I watched her face closely. Her smile froze. Then it twitched. The color didn't just drain from her face. It seemed to fall right out of her. Her eyes widened, and she blinked rapidly, as if trying to make the numbers rearrange themselves into something more manageable. She leaned in closer, reading the itemized list. The Royal Tower, the Wagyu, the Chilean Sea Base, the 3 bottles of Reserve Cabernet, the desserts, the brandy. She let out a small, strangled noise. "What is it?" Ricky asked, his voice tight. Rochelle didn't answer. She just slid the folder across the tablecloth toward him, her hand trembling slightly. Ricky looked down. I saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. He closed his eyes for a second, exhaling a long, shaky breath. "Is there a problem?" Mr. Ashcroft asked, oblivious. "They didn't overcharge for the coffee, did they? You have to watch these places. They nickel and dime you." "No," Ricky said, his voice sounding thin and reedy. "No, it's correct." "How much is it?" Mrs. Ashcroft asked, leaning forward with nosy curiosity. "It's 1,400, Ricky whispered. 1,400? Mr. Ashcroft let out a low whistle. "Pricey, but hey, quality costs. Worth every penny." Ricky didn't look like he thought it was worth every penny. He looked like he was about to be sick. He looked at Rochelle. They started a furious, silent communication, widened eyes, subtle head shakes, frantic tapping on the table. Rochelle kicked him under the table. I felt the vibration through the floor. "Do something," she mouthed. Ricky looked panic-stricken. He looked at his father-in-law, then at his wife, and finally, inevitably, he turned his eyes toward me. I knew this look. It was the same look he used to give me when he was 10 years old and had broken a neighbor's window. It was the look that said, "Mom, fix it." But he wasn't 10. He was 40, and he had just spent the last 2 hours watching his wife treat me like a beggar. He cleared his throat. It was a wet, nervous sound. "So, Mom," he started. He tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace. "That was a nice dinner, right? Good to catch up." "It was certainly memorable, Ricky," I said calmly. "Yeah," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Listen, I know we said this was our treat, and it is, mostly, but, well, the bill came out a little higher than we expected. We didn't realize the wine was quite that much." I said nothing. I just stared at him. And he continued, sweating now, "Since you're here, and, you don't really have many expenses these days, living alone, and all." He trailed off, waiting for me to jump in, waiting for me to offer. That's what I had always done. I had always filled the gaps. I had always been the safety net. I stayed silent. Rochelle kicked him again. "Harder." "What Ricky is trying to say," Rochelle interjected, her voice sharp and desperate, "is that it would be nice if you chipped in. We treated you to a lovely evening at the most exclusive place in town. It's only fair." "Fair." I repeated the word. It tasted bitter. "Yes, fair," Rochelle snapped. "We're a family. Families help each other." "You told me," I said slowly, "that I shouldn't order food because we were on a budget. You told me to know my place. You told me I had poor planning skills. We're not asking you to pay the whole thing." Ricky said quickly, raising his hands. "God, Mom, don't be so dramatic. We're just asking. Look, the tip alone is like $300. Do you have that? Do you have $300 in your savings? You could just cover the tip. That would really help us out." I looked at them. They had eaten lobster. They had drunk the finest wine. They had insulted my home, my life, and my dignity. They had let me sit there with a glass of tap water while they feasted. And now they wanted me to pay the gratuity on their gluttony. The audacity of it was so pure, so absolute, that it felt clarifying. It washed away the last lingering doubts. I had. There was no love here. There was only usage. I was an ATM to them. An ATM they could kick and insult until they needed a withdrawal. You want me to pay the tip? I asked softly. Ideally, Rochelle said, crossing her arms. I mean, you barely touched your scallop, but you still occupied a seat. It's only right. I occupied a seat. I whispered. I looked at Ricky. He was pleading with his eyes. Just do this one last thing, Mom. Just save me one last time. I took a deep breath. The air in the restaurant felt crisp and cool. I felt the weight of my navy blue dress, the fabric I had smoothed down so carefully in the mirror hours ago. No, I said. Ricky blinked. What? No, I said again. I placed my hands on the edge of the table. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the wooden floor. A harsh, screeching sound that cut through the murmur of the restaurant. People at the nearby tables turned to look. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. I rose to my full height. I am not a tall woman, but in that moment, I felt 10 feet tall. Mom, what are you doing? Ricky hissed, looking around nervously at the staring diners. Sit down. You're making a scene. I am not making a scene, Ricky, I said, my voice clear and projecting just enough for the tables around us to hear. I am standing up. For the first time in years, I am finally standing up. Rochelle rolled her eyes. Oh God, here we go. The martyr act. Just tell us if you're too broke to help, Marguerite. We don't need a speech. I looked down at her. She looked so small from up here. So petty. I am not broke, Rochelle, I said, and I am not a martyr. Not anymore. I picked up my purse. I didn't open it. I just held it. You asked me to know my place, I said to the table. I think it's time I showed you exactly where that is. I turned away from them. I didn't walk toward the exit. I didn't walk toward the restroom. I raised my hand in the air, a sharp, commanding gesture. Julian, I called out. The kitchen doors swung open instantly. The chef stepped out, wiping his hands on his apron. He wasn't smiling. He looked ready. The show was over. The lesson was about to begin. The kitchen doors swung open with a heavy thud, and the noise of the dining room seemed to vanish instantly. Julian stepped out. He is a large man, broad-shouldered, wearing a pristine white chef's coat with his name embroidered in black thread over the pocket. He commands the room just by walking into it. Usually, he stays behind the line, shouting orders and perfecting sauces. He only comes out for VIPs or emergencies. Rochelle looked at me, then at the chef, her lip curling in a mix of confusion and annoyance. Do you know the cook, Marguerite? She asked, her voice dripping with condescension. Did you complain about the scallop? Honestly, you're embarrassing us. Quiet, Rochelle, I said. I didn't shout it. I just said it with a finality that made her mouth snap shut. Julian marched across the dining room floor. He didn't look at the other tables. He didn't look at Rochelle or her parents, who were now staring at him with open mouths. He walked straight to me. When he reached me, the stern look on his face melted away. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He didn't bow like a servant. He opened his arms. Marguerite, he said warmly. He pulled me into a hug. It was a strong, reassuring embrace, the kind that says, I've got your back. He smelled of rosemary and wood smoke. When he pulled back, he kept his hands on my shoulders, looking me up and down with concern. Was everything to your standards, Mrs. Pittman? He asked, his voice carrying clearly over the silent table. David told me you enjoyed the scallop, but I wasn't sure about the service. You know how I get about the service. The scallop was perfection. Julian, I said, smoothing my dress. As always. And the company, he asked, glancing sideways at the table with a look that could curdle milk. Are these people bothering you? I can have them removed. Rochelle let out a gasp. Removed? Excuse me? You know who we are? We just spent $1,400 in your establishment. Julian finally looked at her. He looked at her with the same disinterest one might show a fly buzzing near a window. I know exactly who you are, Julian said calmly, and I don't care about your $1,400. I care about Mrs. Pittman. Why? Ricky asked, his voice shaking. He was looking back and forth between me and the chef, trying to solve a puzzle that was missing half the pieces. Mom, what is going on? Why does the chef know you? I looked at my son. I looked at the fear in his eyes. He was starting to realize that the ground beneath his feet wasn't as solid as he thought. He knows me, Ricky, I said, because he works for me. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. What? Rochelle whispered. I said, he works for me. I repeated, my voice gaining strength. I didn't want to tell you. I wanted to see if you could love me just as I was, a mother living in a small house. But since you seem to only respect money, let me speak a language you understand. I walked over to the window, looking out at the property. 10 years ago, after your father passed, I got the life insurance payout. I began. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Everyone told me to put it in a savings account. They said, Marguerite, play it safe. Keep it for a rainy day. I turned back to face them, but I met Julian. He was a line cook then, with a vision for a restaurant, but no credit history. No bank would touch him. They saw a risk. I saw a man with integrity and talent. So I took every penny I had, my entire safety net, and I invested it in him. I became the silent partner. I gestured to the room around us, the high timber beams, the velvet curtains, the packed tables of wealthy patrons. This isn't just a restaurant, Ricky. It's a group. We own this location. We own the Blue Heron in Burlington, and we just closed on a third location in Montpelier last week. Rochelle's face had gone from pale to a sickly shade of gray. Her parents were frozen, their forks hovering halfway to their mouths. I own 60% of this business, I said, letting the numbers hit them like a hammer. I am the majority shareholder. Every time you come here to show off, every time you order a bottle of wine to impress your friends, you are putting money in my pocket. Mom. Ricky stammered. He tried to stand up, but his legs seemed to fail him, and he sank back into his chair. I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me? We could have what? I cut him off. You could have respected me. You could have been proud of me. I shook my head slowly. No, Ricky, if I had told you, Rochelle would have just tried to spend it. You wouldn't have seen me. You would have seen a bank account. I looked at Rochelle. She was trembling. I could see the gears turning in her head, frantically trying to rewrite the last 2 hours. She forced a smile onto her face, a terrified, desperate smile. Marguerite, she squeaked. Mom, oh my God, this is amazing. Why are we fighting? We're family. This is incredible news. We should be celebrating. I mean, business partners, we have so much to talk about. Daddy knows so much about investing. He could help you. Stop, I said. The single word silenced her. Do not call me Mom, I said, and do not think for 1 second that this changes our relationship. It only clarifies it. I looked down at the table. I looked at the black leather folder containing the bill that they had tried to humiliate me with, the bill they had demanded I pay the tip on because I had poor planning. I reached out and picked it up. Rochelle watched me take it, a flicker of hope in her greedy eyes. She thought I was going to pay it and then welcome them into the fold. She thought money fixed everything. I didn't build this empire to feed people who starve their mothers. I said softly. I opened the folder. I pulled a pen from my purse, a nice pen, heavy and silver, one I had bought for myself when we turned our first profit. I scribbled across the receipt. Void. Then I signed my name at the bottom. Marguerite Pittman, owner. I closed the folder and tossed it onto the table. It landed with a slap in front of Ricky. I'm comping the meal, I said. Ricky let out a breath of relief. Mom, thank you. Don't thank me, I interrupted. This isn't a gift, Ricky. Consider it a severance package. He froze. A severance package? Yes, I said. You wanted to cut ties? You wanted to treat me like a stranger? Fine. You got your wish. The meal is free, but it's the last thing you will ever get from me. I turned to Julian. I'm ready to go now, I said. Of course, Mrs. Pittman, Julian said. I'll walk you to your car, and I'll have the valet bring it around to the front, so you don't have to wait in the cold. Thank you, Julian, I said. You're a good man. I started to walk away. I could hear Rochelle sputtering behind me, trying to get Ricky to do something. Say something. Mom. Wait. Ricky called out, his voice cracking. You can't just leave. We're your family. I stopped. I didn't turn around. I spoke to the air in front of me, knowing he could hear every word. No, Ricky, I said, you were my family. Now, you're just customers, and I reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. I walked out of the dining room, Julian at my side, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their expensive dinner, realizing that the poorest person at the table had been the richest one all along. I didn't look back as I walked through the heavy oak doors of the dining room and into the lobby. I could hear the commotion behind me, the hushed whispers of the other diners, the clinking of silverware as people went back to their meals, and the frantic, heavy footsteps of my son running after me. Mom, please stop. Ricky caught up to me just as the valet was stepping out to retrieve my car. He was out of breath, his face slick with sweat. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and desperate. I stopped and looked down at his hand on my sleeve. I didn't pull away. I just looked at it until he let go, shrinking back like a scolded child. Mom, you can't just leave like this, he stammered. We need to talk. There's so much I didn't know. There is nothing to talk about, Ricky, I said. My voice was calm. It surprised me how calm I was. My heart wasn't racing anymore. The anxiety that had plagued me all week was gone. But the business, he said, his eyes wide. Rochelle didn't know. If she had known you were, well, that you were successful, she never would have acted that way. She worries about money. You know how it is. He was blaming his wife. He was throwing her under the bus to save himself. It was pathetic. She worries about money. I repeated, so she orders lobster while I drink water? It was a misunderstanding. Ricky pleaded, we can fix this. Robert, Mr. Ashcroft, he's got great connections. We could help you run things. We could turn this into a real family legacy. Just come back inside. Have dessert with us. Let's start over. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had sat silently while his wife told me I had poor planning. I looked at the man who had asked me to pay the tip. He didn't want a mother. He wanted a partner. He wanted access to the VIP table. Ricky, I said, shaking my head slowly, you are missing the point. You are missing it so completely that it breaks my heart. What point? He asked, frustration leaking into his voice. I'm apologizing. You are apologizing because I have money, I said. You are apologizing because you just realized you bet on the wrong horse. But that's not love, Ricky. That's business. I stepped closer to him, looking him dead in the eye. You didn't need to know I was rich to treat me with respect. I told him. You didn't need to know I owned the building to make sure your mother had dinner. You just needed to be a decent son. You just needed to be a good person. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The truth hung between us, heavy and undeniable. I have spent my life making excuses for you. I continued. I told myself Rochelle was the problem. I told myself you were just busy. But tonight, I saw you. I really saw you. And I don't like what I saw. The heavy front doors opened, and the valet pulled my sedan up to the curb. It looked small next to the Range Rovers and luxury SUVs, but to me, it looked like a chariot. "Goodbye, Ricky," I said. I turned my back on him. "Mom, don't do this," he called out, his voice cracking. "What am I supposed to tell them?" "Tell them the truth," I said over my shoulder. "Tell them the owner asked you to leave." I walked out into the cool night air. The valet, a young man who had seen me come and go for years, held the door open for me with a smile. "Drive safe, Mrs. Pittman," he said. "Thank you, son," I replied. I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking shut was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. It sealed out the noise. It sealed out the expectations. It sealed out the disappointment. As I drove down the mountain, leaving the lights of the Gilded Stag behind me in the rearview mirror, I expected to feel sad. I expected to cry. After all, I had just severed ties with my only child. But the tears didn't come. Instead, I felt lighter. I cracked the window and let the cold wind hit my face. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a burden. I didn't feel like an old piece of furniture that no one knew what to do with. I felt capable. I felt strong. I had walked into the fire and come out unburned. The drive home was peaceful. When I pulled into my driveway in Burlington, the house was dark. Usually, that darkness felt lonely. Tonight, it felt like sanctuary. It felt like peace. I walked inside, hung my navy blue dress back in the closet, and put on my kettle for a cup of tea. I sat in my favorite chair, the one Rochelle always said was tacky, and took a sip. The silence in the house wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility. I reached for the notepad I keep by the phone. I had one more thing to do, one final loose end to tie up. I picked up my pen and wrote a note to myself for the morning. Call lawyer. Update will. I thought about Julian, who worked 80 hours a week and treated his staff like family. I thought about the local women's shelter that always needed funding. I thought about the people who actually brought goodness into the world. Ricky and Rochelle were waiting for an inheritance that was never coming. The thought made me smile. I finished my tea, turned off the lamp, and went to bed. I slept better that night than I had in 20 years. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.